All right, let's talk about what's going on in the city of Baltimore. In 2017, there were 342 murders. It's the highest rate the city's ever seen. It was also the highest rate of any major U.S. city that year, more than double that of Chicago. The rise in violent crime in the city of Baltimore started back in 2015, following the highly controversial death of 25-year-old Freddie Gray. Gray suffered a fatal spinal cord injury while he was in police custody. His death sparked outrage and riots in Baltimore and demonstrations across the country, really. A lot of people blamed his death on a broken police system. And despite recent efforts to repair it, the situation seems to be getting worse. ProPublica reporter Alec MacGillis published an article in collaboration with the New York Times on the rise in crime in Baltimore. Alec joins us now. The first question I had after reading parts of your article were why? What's going on?
It's extraordinary what we've been experiencing here. I mean, it really is like nothing else in the country. Our rate is double Chicago. Chicago gets a lot of attention for their high homicide rate. Our rate is double that. And my piece set out to try to answer the question of what has been happening here. Broadly speaking, what I found was that there has been without question, a kind of a police pullback here over the last few years that started right after the protests after Freddie Gray's death. That really allowed a kind of unraveling to start happening here in the city. On top of that, you had, even before Freddie Gray's death, some kind of key bureaucratic and political personnel changes that happened in the city that really kind of weakened the foundations of government in Baltimore that also played a role. But really, I think there's even my piece has not really fully answered what's been happening here, because it's just been too kind of extraordinary to get one's hands around.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the former police chief in New Orleans now become the commissioner in Baltimore?
He did, and he seems like a really good choice. That if one wanted to look for some reason for hope here in Baltimore, it would be his selection really as chief. He seems like very well suited to the job. He comes from a city, New Orleans, that is also very violent. He's also been dealing with a big consent decree, federal consent decree around reforming the New Orleans Police Department. Baltimore is now grappling with its own consent decree to reform this department. So he seems like someone who could be quite good for the job, but it's really a Herculean task that he's undertaking here.
So your article will, I mean, if I lived in Baltimore, I would be bothered and afraid by this. As someone who doesn't live in Baltimore, I find it disturbing. How did the police feel?
Well, the police, they have been doing their job in a department in total turmoil for the last few years. It's hard to overstate just how broken this department has become. You had the initial pullback by the police following the riots, the unrest. The police were very aggrieved over 6 of their members having been charged in Freddie Gray's death. So they really kind of pulled back in the months that followed. You had that going on. You also had an extraordinary police corruption case that was unfolding in those years, in the last few years. Epic levels of police corruption where they were charged, 8 police officers were charged with having robbed hundreds of thousands of dollars from people around town. On top of that, you've had one commissioner after another. We've had basically one commissioner per year over the last 5 or 6 years. The force is very undermanned now. They've lost a lot of officers who left the department. They've had trouble hiring to fill those slots. So it's really a department that's in complete crisis.
Alec, tell me exactly what the federal government is doing in terms of this police monitor that they have set up.
So after Freddie Gray's death, the federal government, the Department of Justice, came in and did a big investigation of the department. They put out a big report in 2016, and that report basically found that the department had been engaged in all kinds of discriminatory behavior in the years leading up to Freddie Gray's death, harassing and arresting Black men in vast disproportion, to their population in the city, and using excessive force in cases where it was not warranted. And that report led to what is called a, quote, consent decree, where the city agrees to do all sorts of reforms of its police department. with the oversight of a federal judge who basically oversees all these reforms, makes sure that they're happening. This has been done in a lot of other cities around the country in the last couple of decades. That's what the department is now engaged in, are these reforms. And they're controversial because some officers are saying that the reforms make it hard for them to do their job, make it hard for them to deal with crime in the city, to, for instance, approach a very crowded corner where you have drug dealing going on. They feel like that these reforms now keep them from being able to do that the way they need to. So that is really, that's become a very big issue here in town, sort of how one continues to do active, proactive policing within the framework of these new reforms.
Is it true that this is having an effect on the economy as well?
It definitely is. Baltimore's economy is actually relatively solid, as post-industrial cities go. It's actually doing, until this all started happening, it was doing relatively okay compared to a lot of other Rust Belt cities. But this is definitely having an effect. I mean, people, there's an element of fear that has come back into the equation for the city in a way that's just not the case anymore for most cities. Population has started falling again. We were gaining population just a few years ago. Population has started falling again. You hear about restaurants closing downtown because fewer people are coming in from the suburbs. People are more fearful now about coming into the city. Probably almost more fearful than they need to be because a lot of the crime is still heavily concentrated in certain parts of town. But it's definitely having a real effect now on the city's population and its economy.
Wow, Baltimore. That's a hell of a sobering picture you paint there. Tell folks where they can go read your article.
You can read the article both at ProPublica.org or at the New York Times.
Alec MacGillis, thank you.
Thank you.